You'll make bread, and this stuff is killer. It's amazing. Jalapeno pepper bread. Let's see if we can hear it sing. Oh my gosh, it smells so good. Well, the scale has been around a long time, and they've been used throughout history. I don't actually think that the Romanian housewife who was baking a loaf of bread used a scale to weigh out the measurements of her flour and water and yeast and salts. In fact, I watched a video of a Romanian woman making sourdough, and there was no scale in sight. She scooped flour out of a bucket and threw it on the counter and poured water on it out of a pitcher. I realized that I'd been doing it that way, in a sense, for some time. Sure, I used measuring cups, I used measuring spoons, but honestly, I used those as a rough guide. I would scoop something out of the flour bin and throw it in the pan, and it would approximate about a cup, and so on. But in any case, I think people dwell too long on scales and weights and measures when it comes to making bread. And so my point of these videos is to try to make a video or a video series that helps you make better bread. So how do we make sourdough? Well, first of all, sourdough is very simple. Like my French bread, sourdough is nothing more than water, flour, salt, and some sort of leavening agent. So a leavening agent is the yeast or the bacteria, or in some breads, the baking powder that is used to create the air bubbles that cause the dough to expand as those air bubbles expand. So those air bubbles are gas, and their gas is produced by the yeasts. So those gas bubbles are what causes the bread to expand, and that's what's going to help you have a nice, light, soft bread. But how do we get those to not just pass right through the dough and keep on going into the atmosphere? Well, how we do that is primarily through something called the gluten window. So the gluten window is when the gluten in flour, which is the protein in the flour, binds in such a way with water that it becomes kind of elastic and stretchy. And it's that elastic stretchiness of the gluten window that allows your dough ball to rise as the air bubbles push against it. And so it doesn't rip apart and allow the air just to go right through it. But for now, I'm going to get to the point, which is to make sourdough. So let's get started. I've got my very active culture. It's risen all the way to the top of this mason jar. I've got my sea salt, non-iodized sea salt. Do not use iodized salt. I've got some flour. In this case, this is about 3 cups of a high gluten flour. You do not have to use high gluten flour to make sourdough, but when you're beginning, you're learning how to make sourdough, it really helps to have high gluten flour. It binds better, you get a better gluten window, you're going to get a better rise, you're going to get a better dough ball in the beginning. Later you can go to 100% all-purpose flour, it'll work fine. But for now, that's what I would recommend. I also have about 1.5 cups of, probably room temperature now, water. You could use cold water. I've used cold water to hot water. It doesn't really matter. It just depends on how long you're willing to let your bread proof or rise. I also have some olive oil. That's for later. And of course my utensils and things that I need. So let's get started. First of all, we need to get some culture. So the first thing I'm going to do, this recipe that I use uses 1/2 cup of culture. So yes, I'm going to kind of measure it because that's what I do. I kind of measure things. As you can see, it's flowing over. So it's a little more than 1/2 cup, but it's not a lot more. Now, if you look at this, I will show you this. This is very airy, very active, lots of bubbles in it. That's the best time to make sourdough with your culture. If your culture is not real active, you can still make sourdough, but it's going to take a little more work. So ideally, especially if you're starting out with the sourdough making adventure, then my first recommendation is that you ensure that your culture is very active. Now, it's 9 a.m. and I fed this culture probably 2.5 to 3 hours ago. So 2.5 to 3 hours, it's very active, and that's a good thing. I want it active, okay? So now I've got my culture in here. Next, I'm going to take 3 cups of flour, and I didn't measure that flour perfectly. It's pretty close to about 3 cups, maybe a tad over. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my water, and I'm not going to put it all in. I'm going to put about 1 cup to 1.25 cups in. Just pouring it in. Because I know that I'm going to need a little more water. Now, this is a little different than my French breads. My French bread, I put the water in first and I work up with the flour. In the case of my sourdoughs, I put the culture, then I put the flour, then I work up with the water. I suppose you could do it either way. This is just the way that I do my sourdoughs, and it works. I will tell you that I always love the flavor of my sourdough. There isn't a time when I make a sourdough that doesn't taste good. It's just a matter of how soft it ends up being in the end. Sometimes you can't buy sourdough better than what I can make at home. Sometimes it's a little on the stiff side. That's okay. That happens. Notice I'm adding a little bit of water at a time. Just a little bit. I'm down to 1.25 cups added so far. And all I'm doing here, by the way, is I'm just taking the dough ball and slowly working it around in the bowl. Now, if you look now, you'll see that it's stiff, and it's still got quite a bit of dry flour in there. That's okay. I just keep adding a little bit of water at a time. What I don't want is to add all of my water at once, because since I'm not perfectly measuring my flour and perfectly measuring my water every time, making bread is an art. It's about feel. Don't just weigh and measure everything exactly, throw them all together and hope that it works. I think that's the big issue for most people is they say, well, the recipe says this many cups or this much weight or whatever, and that's going to give you perfect weights and measures. It's not necessarily going to give you perfect bread. Now, I know that there are commercial bakers that have got it down and they train forever to do it, and they get this perfect balance, and they know exactly what their weights and measures are, and they're making bread by the thousands of loaves. That's fine. They've got all the industrial equipment, they've got all the experience, and they've also got all the chemicals. I mean, I don't think I've seen a bakery bread that didn't have tons of chemicals. You know, if it sits on your counter for a month and it's not green and it's still soft, there's your sign. This bread, sourdough lasts longer than my regular breads, but still, even a sourdough isn't going to last for months on the counter. I think I could get 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even a little more. I've never tested it. They never last that long. But, okay, all right, enough blabbering about breads. Here we go. So, I'm just about there. Give me just a second. Needed to get a second spatula. Okay, now, here we go. So, let me show you what I got going on here. So there you go. See that ball? You see how stiff that is? It's sticky, it's stiff, it's already seeming a little elastic. Notice I haven't added the salt. This is one of the little tricks that you can do if you want to make bread and you want to make it successfully, and particularly sourdough. Now, first of all, there's a little less than 1/4 cup of water left here, okay? I haven't added any salt. I haven't added any oil. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this now. Okay, I got it covered. Now we're going to give it an hour or 2 or 3, whatever I feel like. I think up to 4 even is perfectly fine. So sometime between now, which is 9:08, and noon, I'm going to come back. and I'm going to add the salt, and I'm going to work the salt into the dough. What I'm doing by not adding the salt right now is I'm not controlling the culture. I'm allowing the culture to really get active. Now it was already active. I want it to be really active. The more active I can get it, the better. It's called an autolyze. It's just a period of time that you're going to allow the yeast, or in this case, culture, which is yeast and bacteria, to really build up and get strong and really get active. So we're going to leave it. We're going to let it do that. It's just flour, water, and in this particular case, the culture. Now, in like a French bread, if you want to do an autolyze, put in the comments how the heck you pronounce that word. But typically what you would do is you would do flour and water, no yeast, no salt. Some do flour, water, yeast, and then add salt 30 minutes later when you're adding like an instant yeast or something like that. So in this case, it's just culture and flour, water, culture, and I'm going to let it sit for an hour or two or whatever. And when I'm ready to get back to it, then I'll come back, I'll add the salt, and then work that in. And then I'll go ahead and cover it and let it go for about 12 hours before I punch it down. Now, let's take a break for a couple, 2-3 hours, and when I come back, we'll get back to making this sourdough. All right, folks, we're about 40 minutes into the autolyze, and I'm gonna set this aside because I've got another project going with some sourdough. And I thought while I was waiting to add the salt, I would go ahead and I would deal with this other loaf of sourdough that I'm making. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to grease up this cookie sheet. Now for my sourdoughs, I more often than not do not grease a cookie sheet. I use a floured surface. Opposite of what I do otherwise. But for this one, I'm going to use grease. So first off, look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Look at that big old dough ball. Perfect dough ball. Lots of air. Just beautiful. Here, I'm going to show you. Look at all that air. Okay, that's really airy. That's beautiful. So now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this loaf. It feels pretty good. I'm just using my fingers to kind of pat this down a little bit. And then I've got some sharp cheddar, and I use chunks, I use slices, I've used grated, I use all kinds of things. Don't restrict yourself to just using chunks of cheese if you want to add cheese to it. Honestly, add whatever you want. Don't be shy. Experiment. I think one of the keys to making great bread is to doing it a lot. So now I got some cheese added in here. Now, for the fun part, I've got some garden fresh peppers. I've got some jalapenos in here, and then I got a red pepper that, quite frankly, I forgot what the name of the pepper was. So I'm gonna throw those down on there. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of do the quarter pull and stretch kind of method, right? So I'm just taking the bread and I'm folding it over. And as I do, I'm gonna go ahead and throw a little cheese and pepper in here and there, so that I can really embed the bread with chunks of cheese and peppers, okay? And I don't go by any measure or anything else. I just decide I'm gonna do it, and then I start adding it. So now I'm gonna take this, and as you can see now, I have a nice dough ball. It's feeling really good. So, you know, for those that are learning how to make this, now I've used a greased sheet with my special stuff there, my Better Than Pam spray, and if I push on this, I can see that the gluten window is forming nicely. In fact, I could bake this right now. It's pushing up, it's tons of air. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this in the bowl, and then I'm gonna cover it. Again, And I'm gonna let that go for about another 4 hours. And that's all it's gonna take, is about another 4 hours. It'll be good to go. So we'll leave that and give it another, I don't know, another hour, maybe more. I really want this hopping. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna give it time to really get hopping. And in the meantime, I got some other projects I'm working on. That one there that I just put the cheese in and whatnot, I'll probably bake today around, it's almost 10 o'clock now. So probably about 1 p.m. I'll probably bake that today. So you'll get to watch that, all right? Okay, it's been, not quite 2 hours. I think that's plenty of time. So we're gonna go ahead and add the salt. So I add 1.5 teaspoons of salt to my sourdough recipe. Okay, and then what I do is I take that and I start working it in. Now what I want you to see is when I push on that, you can see some spring. So even though dough has not sat for long, just a couple hours, it's already developing a nice gluten window. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that spring. Now, because I'm adding the salt later, instead of doing it right away, I've given it almost 2 hours before I add the salt. I now have to kind of knead that salt in. That's really not a bad thing. That's just going to add, even though it's technically this is a no-knead bread, you don't have to actually knead it. I've just been making bread a long time. Frankly, it's just easy. I just do it. So I'm just kind of doing a knead really just to get that salt mixed into the dough really well. I don't want to concentrate it in any one given place. So I'm just kind of kneading it here. I can tell it's got a gorgeous gluten window already. Look at that. Look at how elastic that is. That's a great gluten window. Now, what I'm going to do now is take my oil and I usually put about a tablespoon in, and then I'm going to roll it around, roll the ball around in the oil. I want to try to help prevent it from sticking to the sides. So I just roll it around, make sure the sides are nicely coated. A lot of recipes call for putting the dough ball in a bowl that's already greased. Why use 2 bowls? This is easier. Now, I'm going to let that sit, and it'll proof for 8 to 12 hours. Okay, since I'm an impatient man, what can I say? It's 12:30, so we're a little bit earlier than I had planned. However, my bread is doing well. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get this bread in the oven. So this is the overnight proof that I had with cheese and peppers in it. So what I'm going to do here is kind of push those in. It's a nice feeling loaf. So I'm just going to take this loaf. This is a little different than my behavior when messing with a regular sourdough. In this case, I'm just working it into a bit of a ball first, and then I'm going to go ahead and stick it in the oven. Okay, there it is. Scored the top. Okay, I got to set the timer for 25 minutes. Meanwhile, for those that are watching the channel to learn stuff, I'm going to do another French, this time baguettes, and I'm going to do that today. So I will film that today as well. So look for that to come out in another video. Okay, so there you have it. I will get back to you here in, well, we've got 25 minutes for the bread to bake covered. I'll show you that when I pull the lid off, and then of course we'll finish that up with about 17-18 minutes baking uncovered, and I'll show you that. And then of course, and I will continue and film the second loaf either this evening or tomorrow morning. Probably tomorrow morning. I really like to go a good 25 hours or so. It's time to check out and see how this bread is doing. Okay, smells good, looks good. Whew, I can't wait. It's awesome. It's gonna be awesome bread. Oh boy, that smells good. There's something about making bread, folks. I mean, come on. If you're not making loaves of bread yet, you watch my channel, you learn from me, you'll make bread, and this stuff is killer. It's amazing. Check this out. Jalapeno pepper bread. Let's see if we can hear it sing. Oh my gosh, it smells so good. It smells like that perfect sourdough toasted crust with that just slightly cooked cheese smell and a hint of pepper. Oh, that loaf might not last to the party. I'm sorry, folks, but that one might get eaten a lot sooner. We'll see how other breads go today, but whoo! Oh gosh. So don't blame me if you gain 10 pounds just looking at this video, watching this video, and thinking about eating this awesome, super tasty. Oh my God, I might have to stop right now and just eat some. That's great. Anyway, I should say thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, hit like, hit the notification bell. But I guess that would be something I should do at the end of the video, and I keep forgetting that I've got one more loaf of bread for you to see. And this is the one that we did earlier. It's looking good. I'm going to bake that one later, so hang in there. We'll get to it. Yeah.
No, but this is exactly.
Bread is done.